welcome to Look Around Florida. Hey, Dylan. Hey, Wilford. Good to see both of you. Please share these episodes out with your camps and your divisions. I got Michael C. Hardy. He's in the background. We got, hey, Derek. Good to see you, sir. We got one current event going on right now. Jeffro, I'll see you tomorrow night. We got the Sons of Confederate Veterans Mechanized Cavalry annual happening right now. Hey, David, happening right now in Traverse, Florida. I'll be going up tomorrow after work. Hey, Linda, uh, after work, heading up to Traverse. A lot of the guys from the Sons of Confederate Veteran Mechanized Cavalry will be there throughout the country. Quite a bit of our guys here in the state. Hey, Heather, good to see you. Will be there. I've Everything kicks off Friday at 9 a.m. Hey, Roy, good to see you, sir. AOT councilman in the house. Uh, so everything kicks off Friday at 9 a.m. in Traverse, Florida. There's at 9 a.m. is the meetings. Soon as the meetings get done, there's probably going to be a little break where guys can go do stuff. Then the shindig starts, meaning low country boil and other food will be there. Uh, as supper gets done, Tommy Rock's band will be there. They are a Leonard Skinner tribute band. Uh, so, hey, Al. Hey, Garrett. It's got to be a great time in Traverse this weekend, starting tomorrow night as soon as I get done with work and on the road. Be seeing our AOT councilman, Jeff Rocard, and various others will be there. Hey, Mike. Yep, there's got to be food in Traverse, Florida at the Sons of Confederate Veterans Mechanized Cavalry Annual, sponsored by the 3rd Battalion Company D. Please check out our Facebook page. If you're on mine, you probably got an invite from me. That way it keeps you up to date with what's going on. Victor, I'm going back to 1812. I know Roddy Nichols is cooking part of it, and we have a member named Guppy. He's also going to be cooking too. Good point, Roy. Remember the cornbread guy. All righty, guys, give a warm welcome to Michael C. Hardy. All righty.
Good evening. You know, you're talking about Tavares. I grew up not far from there.
Yes, sir.
I did, and I actually, kind of cut my teeth um, doing reenactments in Florida, all over the state. From Olustee to Newport Richey to Arcadia to Olustee. I think I already said that. Brooksville. Just Renagers there and Apopka, just all over the place. But I lived not far from Tavares for many years.
Isn't that where you grew up?
Yep, not far from there.
Yep.
A lot of great history down there. A lot of Confederates buried in that area, and of course, a few Yankees. It's interesting down the road, just a little piece of a community called Zellwood, which is named for a federal colonel who wanted to start a community down there after the war. Best I remember, he's not buried there, but lots of great history.
Oh yeah, and we had I've had Yankee Bob on. I don't know if you remember him from the reenactments we've held right there in Traveras, and
Right.
I love the. There's two towns there. One was founded by Confederate veterans. The other one was founded by Union veterans.
Yep. Yep. Pretty interesting history.
Yeah. Hey, and that good to see you. So, Michael, what you been up to lately?
Well, I've got a new book out. And so I've been traveling all over the place, 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes, and I spoke to the, Major Ross camp in Charlotte, North Carolina last night. They actually meet in a town called Matthews, which I tell them, "Y'all are on the wrong side of Charlotte." Not that Matthews is a bad town, it's just on the opposite side of Charlotte that I live on, and so, I have to leave really early to make sure I'm down there by 6 o'clock. And Charlotte, of course, is a huge place, but I've been a lot of other places. I'm actually gonna be speaking to the Saltville camp, Saltville, Virginia camp coming up this Sunday. They meet at the Museum of Middle Appalachia, I think at 2 p.m. So if any of y'all folks out there are in Southwest Virginia, come on over and hang out with me. And it's a great museum, and we're going to talk a little history.
Cool. Yeah. And let me put this up. This is your latest book, correct?
Yes.
Yep. Feeding Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. And I know it took you a little while.
It did. It did. I actually, of course, I've written a lot of stuff over the years, and Confederate regimentals and a brigade history, and food always comes up. And I often say that Confederate soldiers in their letters home, number one, wrote about wanting to come home. That's the number one thing. And number two, they wrote about food, what they were eating, what they were not eating. And not long after I turned in my history of the Branch Lane Brigade, I contacted my publisher and I said, hey, what about a book on food and the Army of Northern Virginia? And he was for that idea. And I sat down and I read just over 300 letters and diaries, sets. I mean, just entire sets, and created an almost day by day account of Confederate soldiers and what they were talking about concerning what they were eating, what they wished they were eating, what they were tired of eating, and used those letters and diaries to put this book together.
Wow.
It probably took, reading all that stuff, it probably took about 2.5 years to formulate all of that.
Okay. And I know Florida played a role in that.
They did, to a degree. Florida was well known for its cattle prior to the war, and a lot of the cattle produced in Florida, some of it went to, there's a great book called Rebel Storehouse that talks about this. But some of it went to the Army of Northern Virginia. A lot of it is the Army of Tennessee. It took a lot of work to get those cattle out of Florida, since Florida's not really connected by a railroad. They do have railroads, they're just not connected to anything. And to get those cattle north to where the Army is. And that took a lot of work. So a lot of the cattle went to the Army of Tennessee or went to places like Charleston to feed that garrison. But then there's the salt. I don't think people today, we go to a restaurant and there's a salt shaker, or if you run out of salt, you just go to the grocery store and buy a little container of salt, and it lasts how long? I don't know. Depends on how much salt you use. But for people who live in rural America, not just the South, but rural America in the 19th century, salt is the most important commodity that you can get. You have to have salt to salt down your hogs in the fall, early winter, and So you can hang that, it's a preservative, and you can hang it in your smokehouse and have food have meat for winter, for summer, for spring, for whenever, until it's time to slaughter more hogs. And so Florida produced a lot of salt as well. There were various salt works. When the Bayport Brooksville raid took place in July of 1864, that's one of the things they did, was try to destroy a lot of the salt works there on the Gulf Coast of Florida, kind of in between those two places, in between Bayport and Brooksville.
Interesting.
So it's a fascinating study. Food, I've had a lot of folks say, when are you going to do the Army of Tennessee? And not yet. I've got some other things that I want to am working on, and maybe someday we'll get around to a companion volume on the Army of Tennessee. Overall, the Army of Tennessee was a little better fed than the Army of Northern Virginia. They had a lot more territory to draw from. In the Army of Northern Virginia, you're kind of hemmed in between the Chesapeake Bay to the east, the Appalachian Mountains to the west, and the Potomac River up north. And for a huge chunk of the war, the Federal Army controls that area north of Fredericksburg, north of the Rappahannock River. And of course, we know what happens in the valley in 1864. The Shenandoah Valley is often called the breadbasket of the Confederacy. And a lot of it was played out, by the time we get into 1864. If you're in the Army of Tennessee and you're sitting, let's say spring of 1864, just north of Atlanta, Dalton, in that area, then you can draw foodstuffs from all over Georgia and Florida and parts of Alabama and even parts of South Carolina. So I think the Army of Tennessee was probably better fed for much of the war. Don't know exactly all of the war. We just have to do that research and figure that out.
Right. Other than beef and salt, going up to the Army of Northern Virginia, what
Right.
other supplies or food wise, like you said, they were kind of locked,
Yes.
but did any other supplies come into that area, or not really?
Not really. I mean, you have the pine trees in the turpentine industry, the tar industry, but once again, getting those supplies out of the state is a challenge. There was an event in 1862 where a blockade runner landed in it was called Mosquito Inlet then, but it's New Smyrna Inlet now, and they unloaded all of these cases of rifles and things, but they had to unload them in wagons and transport them north, because there was no rail connection that actually connected any place. And that's the challenge with Florida railroads during the war. I think there were two of them, but they didn't connect to any place going north for a while. And so Florida is kind of locked, not a lot of people live in Florida in the 1860s, rather small state. That was before Miami and Walt Disney World and all of those places and the massive population. And Florida is a new state, and there are a lot of people who had just prior to the war moved into the state. And we talked a little bit, about those communities that were established after the war by former Confederates and former Unions. And there's a huge migration of people who moved to Florida after the war. The very first SCV camp I ever joined was the Bluford M. Sims camp in Ocoee. And Sims actually fought in Thomas's Legion. He was, from Western North Carolina and migrated to that area after the war was over.
Yeah, because a lot of the Confederates that I take care of and diving into and learning about them, a lot of them served, you know, Georgia, the
Yep.
Carolinas,
Yep.
because yeah, unfortunately, after the war, Atlanta was pretty much disarray, and a lot of them wanted a new beginning.
Yep. Yep. I don't know if anybody has ever looked at, and if somebody knows, please post this in the notes, but I don't know if anybody has ever looked at the migration patterns after the war. That would be a fascinating study in Florida, just specific to Florida, or even specific to a county in Florida, and look at the Confederate and the Union veterans that are moving to the Sunshine State. That's hey, if you're looking for a graduate project, you can convince your thesis director. There you go.
Yeah, because in my area, down here, Fort Myers, Naples area, if they weren't part of the Cow Cavalry,
Mm-hmm.
the ones that migrated here after the war, I'm coming across a lot of them from North Carolina.
Yep. Yep. It would be interesting to see what part of North Carolina. Of course, the western part where I now live, that northeastern part over there on the coast, a whole lot of dissidents and some Federals, and families were extremely fractured. And it's a hard question to answer about why people left and went someplace. We've got a group of former Confederates from the county west of mine, Mitchell County, who after the war moved to Coos County, Oregon. That's about as far away as you can get from Western North Carolina and still be in the United States. And
Wow.
so and it's not just one family; it's several families that make that cross country trip. So maybe it's true in Florida as well. Um, it would be interesting to know. It really would. Fascinating research project. Not that we need any other research projects, but fascinating
So
research project.
it's always good to keep somebody busy.
That's right. That's right.
Well, maybe I give that little tidbit to our Graves Committee in the Florida Division. They might actually have all the info. They just haven't,
Right.
tied it all in.
It's a real challenge. You're going once you have that list of names and regiments where those people are from. Um, you need to you need to contact um, people in those various states. Your division historian or local historians or somebody, and who can really hammer on that information and see what they can find. I don't think, being a division historian myself, I don't think we don't get enough work. Maybe the Florida division historian is different, but you know, I get a question every once in a while that filters through the division website, and um, it doesn't happen often enough. And maybe somebody else are getting those questions, and before they get to me, it's a simple answer, and they're forwarded to somebody else. But we don't really get enough work as division historians.
And so, shoot, I went brain dead for a second there.
Happens to
uh,
all of us.
I know. So, do you want to go into detail on your book?
Well, we could talk a little bit about it. So
If
I
you don't
mentioned those
mind.
300 letters and diaries. They gave me, like I said earlier, an almost day by day account of Confederate soldiers and what they are eating and when. And it was fascinating to be able to put some um, parallels or to connect some dots. in April, or not April, in the late winter, spring of 1864, there are a whole bunch of Confederate soldiers that start talking about they're getting real coffee. And they're not getting substitute coffee, they are getting real coffee. And come to find out, there was a blockade runner that had come up the Cape Fear River through the port of Wilmington that was loaded with coffee, and they wound up, instead of sending it to a hospital or something, they wound up issuing it to the troops. And, you know, a ton of men are writing about this. And, you know, once you have 3 or 4 men, soldiers, who write this, you can start to draw parallels and dig a little deeper. It is amazing. In the book, there are a lot of different things going on. It is a book from the soldier in the ranks perspective about food. It is not looking from the top down, even though there's a lot of top going on in there, because we talk about Commissary General Northrop. We talk about his conflicts with Robert E. Lee. Lee and Northrop go at it, you know, for about 3 years, constantly locking horns. And Lee had the common Confederate soldiers' food plight. That's a lot of the letters that he's writing to Northrop. He is writing Secretary of War James Seddon and occasionally Jefferson Davis, you know, saying, hey, and this is an 1864-65 story. Hey, we've got problems. This is Lee. I've got problems with desertion, and it's tied to food, and we have got to start feeding the men better. So there's a lot of that story in there, but it's really about the common soldier and about what he ate. And, you know, food is okay in 1861. The railroads are working okay in 61. It's not the getting the food to the army that's the problem in 1861. It's finding cooks.
Oh.
Most of these men, you know, men in rural America were very involved in the production of food. I mean, they're the ones out there plowing the ground, they're sowing the seed, they're doing the harvest, they're butchering the hogs, they're, you know, salting the hogs down, all of that stuff. But many times, as soon as the food gets to the cabin door, they're not involved in that process. And so when they get to these camps in Manassas in 1861, they don't really have a clue about what's going on as far as fixing stuff. And many of them write those letters home. You know, it's, you know, we get plenty of food in 1861. It's just nobody really knows how to cook. And that is a real challenge. So if you can find a soldier in your company that can cook, he makes a lot of money. There's a man by the name of David Parker, and he doesn't join until 1862. He's in his 30s, but he can actually cook. And he is hired at first by men in his company to cook, and then later by the officers in his company to cook. And he is exempt from a lot of the drills and other things because he is responsible for gathering the wood, for making the fire, for preparing the food, and for cleanup. And a lot of the soldiers in the ranks will try and find that person. And it's a real challenge. Some men will bring enslaved men from home. Some men will try and hire them or hire free men to cook for them, but a lot of them don't know how to cook either. So it's a real challenge. They eventually get that sorted out, but as we go through the months and the years of the war, you know, there is less and less food to issue to the common Confederate soldier. And when you only get flour or cornmeal and salt pork, it's not hard to fix that. It's rather monotonous. It's kind of boring. But, you know, anytime that there's anything extra, the soldiers are going to put that in their letters home and write about it. So it's a real challenge, and most soldiers spend most of their time in camp. If you look at 1863 in the Army of Northern Virginia, you only have the Chancellorsville campaign, which is only a few days. You have the Gettysburg campaign, which is about 3 weeks, and then a couple of minor campaigns, Mine Run and Bristoe Station, later in the year, but they're really minor. The rest of the time, the men are in camp. Now, 1862 is a little busier, and then 1864, we have the Overland Campaign, Battles of Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse, and then the Siege of Petersburg starts. But even then, there's a whole lot of monotonous. Anytime you are on campaign, the system kind of breaks down. So soldiers are issued rations, and a lot of times people will think that the Confederate soldier had hardtack and salt pork, and a few times they did get hardtack, but the Confederate government mostly issued them flour, wheat flour or cornmeal, and the soldiers were responsible for preparing that themselves. So if you're with Stonewall Jackson in 1862, you get your rations, and you usually get 2 or 3 days worth of rations because Jackson likes to move early. And you fix that food stuff and you put it in your haversack. And then all your cooking equipment goes to the rear. This is at the very beginning of a campaign. So we have this idea that every Confederate soldier would carry around his frying pan and his coffee pot, and his boiler or tin pan pot or whatever. That didn't happen. By and large, that didn't happen. I do have an officer in the 28th North Carolina who carried a skillet with him, and he would go into battle waving that skillet instead of a sword. But by and large, your mess equipment, those cast iron spiders, or those big tin pots, they're in a wagon someplace in the rear. And if the commissary wagon caught up to you, they would issue that flour and salt pork, but you didn't have any cooking utensils. And there are tons of Confederate soldiers who wrote about, taking that flour and rolling it out and baking it on a board or a rock or wrapping it around their ramrods. And I tried that once when I was young, and that didn't go very well. But there are Confederate soldiers who talk about eating salt pork raw and liking it. There are soldiers who talk about when the cattle a lot of times the Army would move with beef on hoof, because beef does not preserve like cattle. They would slaughter those cattle and issue that meat to the men, and they would just throw it in the fire and cook it and scrape off the ashes and the coals and eat it. And we wonder why so many of our ancestors died of disease.
Yeah.
If you're eating your salt pork raw, I mean, that's not good. And, if you're on campaign and all you get is corn or apples, green apples, I mean, that's going to lead to a really good case of dysentery pretty quick.
Yeah.
Pretty quick. So battle brings a lot of disruption to supplies. And then, as I've already mentioned, as we move through 1863 and 1864, where the Army of Northern Virginia can draw its foodstuffs is really limited. They lose that area north of the Rappahannock River. They will lose the Shenandoah Valley. Rail transportation is rough. So you basically have stuff coming from parts of eastern and central North Carolina and through the port of Wilmington up the railroad. One of the most interesting things that I found while working on this project is this. It's not black market, and it's really not underground because everybody knew about it. But your farmers in Ohio or New York or someplace, they will produce a crop. A broker will buy that crop, or if it's hogs or whatever, they will put it on a train. That train will take it to a port city like Boston or Philadelphia. It will go on a ship. Sometimes it goes directly to the Bahamas, Nassau or someplace. Sometimes it goes to Canada first. When it gets to the Bahamas, it is sold or traded for cotton, and that foodstuffs are put on another shallow draft blockade runner and run through the blockade. So the North is feeding the Southern soldiers during the war, and everybody knows about it. Even Grant in 1864 will complain that here we are trying to beat these people and we are feeding them. So there were a lot of, and I have no idea how many, but there were a lot of farmers up north who were okay with that process, and they could have been copperheads or whatever. I don't know that, but they are okay with that process of feeding the Southern soldiers in a roundabout way. So that's probably one of the most interesting things I found there. A couple other things about the book. There's a whole there's a whole chapter on hospitals and medical equipment during the war. That part of the chapter starts at the battlefield. A lot of times there were cooks assigned, and some of them are black men and some of them are disabled soldiers, but they are assigned to the hospital corps. And when the brigade or division hospitals are established, they immediately start making food for the wounded soldiers, soup or whatever, for the wounded soldiers that are coming in. If you are wounded, and this is another interesting thing, ambulatory, meaning maybe you're wounded in the arm or something like that, and you're in the valley, they will, the Confederate government, kind of like the hospital system, will say, well, we need you, if you're in Winchester, we need you to go to the hospital in Charlottesville. But they don't give you any transportation and they don't give you rations, and you have to walk. And eventually, the Confederate government or the army will establish like aid stations about every 10 miles or so, give or take, where a soldier can go who's ambulatory, who can walk, who can go from aid station to aid station to get something to eat as they make their way on foot to these various hospitals. They are just huge groups of men who may be wounded, they may be sick. I found sick men who did this as well, and they're having to move through the countryside under their own power. I don't think that's a story that really ever gets told. So there's a chapter in the book on feeding the generals. It's not just a top-down look, but that chapter looks at Robert E. Lee and his personal food, not Lee trying to feed the army, but what Robert E. Lee himself was eating. Stonewall Jackson's in that chapter. He's pretty weird when it comes to food. And I came to the conclusion that Jackson probably had irritable bowel syndrome. And he knew what he could eat and he knew what caused him problems. And he had the discipline to only eat what he knew was not going to bother him. Billy Mahone, another Confederate general, is just as weird as Jackson when it comes to food. There's a great story about Mahone having a flock of turkeys, and he is fattening them up. He's got them in a pen right next to his tent, and he is fattening them up. And the morning that he gets up to go out and eat one of those turkeys, they're all gone. There's another story toward the end of the war. Mahone had a milk cow with him all the time, and he would get fresh milk from that cow. And while the army was on the move someplace, he would strap his mess chest to the back of this cow. Well, during the Appomattox campaign, after Petersburg has fallen and Petersburg and Richmond are evacuated, that cow comes up missing, and the Florida Brigade is blamed for that. So there you go. Writing about Florida troops is kind of difficult. There, a brigade history on the Army of Northern Virginia, the Florida Brigade, and the Florida Brigade in the Army of Tennessee. and there's one regimental history on a Florida regiment, but there are none, no others. There's a book on the Milton Light Artillery, which I confess I own, but I've not read. That I don't remember reading it. That's a challenge when you do all of this, is sometimes you'll pick up a book thing, I have never read that, and I'll start through it and get 20 or 30 pages and find some note that I made in the column next to it. So obviously I've read that, but I don't think I've read the one on the Milton Brigade yet, Milton Artillery yet. But there's a lot of work in Florida that can be done. I'll leave that there. So, but I am happy. Garrett Wilson, right? I see in the notes over here, a book on the 4th Florida Infantry would be great. You know, we've got the set of letters from that man, soldier in the 4th. I think it's Ives. I'm not looking at it right offhand. It's over there on one of those shelves. But yeah, I mean, all you really need is one or two good sets of letters, and you've got enough to put together a regimental. By the time you look at that and you go through their compiled service records and see what other, you know, wartime or post-war stuff you dig out, there's plenty of stuff to look at.
Oh yeah, because I got the book based on my Confederate ancestor, Captain James T. McFall, the Palmetto Sharpshooters, and there's I didn't really pay attention on the food part, but there's a letter he sent home asking for a jacket.
Right. And they did. And that's another chapter in the book is I explore all of the, not all, but I explore that whole process of the Confederate soldier in the ranks looking for stuff from home, writing letters, saying, you know, we would like, you know, all of these items sent to us. And of course I focus on the food items, but they were always asking for clothes, at times for tobacco, just tons of stuff that they asked for. And strangely enough, a lot of times they got it. The various families in a community, and most of these Confederate companies are based out of communities that are local. The families from those communities would get together and they would have a box, and they would put material in that box, foodstuffs, clothing, whatever. A lot of times it's just food, and close it up and send it to the Confederate Army, to that regiment, to that company. They would companies would get those boxes. Sometimes the food was good, sometimes it had gone bad, especially in the summer months because it took so long to get them there. Sometimes the boxes got pilfered through. You know, if a guards at a depot thought there was liquor in that box, they would break it open and try and find that alcohol. Not a story we tell a lot about Confederate ancestors. Sean, your Confederate ancestors may have been saints. Mine were probably looking for the liquor.
Well, I can't speak highly of the rest of the family, but you know, we are Scott Irish, so
That's right. Always looking for liquor. But you know,
or a fight.
Yeah, or a fight. It's just a fascinating thing. I've not really been keeping up with comments over here. I don't know if you want me to address any more of these.
Feel free.
Scrolling back up. Awkward moment of silence right there.
Yep.
As I read.
David King, I'll see you tomorrow night, sir.
Derek writes, you know, growing up in St. Pete, that there were reenactments in Newport Richey. I really only remember going to Newport Richey for a reenactment once. I don't know if it happened more than that. This is probably 90, 91, 92, someplace in there. But there were a lot of communities back in the late 80s and the early 90s that would sponsor, you know, reenactments, and they were small affairs. I remember the one we did just north of Arcadia. There were no Yankees that showed up, And so I took 5 other guys, but none of us had federal uniforms either. I don't know why I didn't bring one. And we went and did the federal side of the field and fought against the Confederates, me and 5 other guys. So, and a lot of them were that small, but great stuff.
I have a feeling that was Hunt Satyrs.
No, this is before then.
Oh, okay.
Almost want to say it was at a little airstrip up there, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah.
That was, like I said, well, it was a long time ago, and I've been 100 or 200 places since then.
David, is that for me or Michael? It must be for you, Michael.
I don't even have that open. Is it Garrett that's writing about the Florida Regiment that has a book? Sean, there's nothing in my messages.
No, David said Victor.
Okay. That book, let me look in my library catalog here. That's what happens when you have all of these books. That book, I think, is on the 9th Florida.
Garrett,
it's called Far, Far From Home, the 9th Florida Regiment in the Confederate Army.
Garrett, there's another book. Check with your cousin Leon. I remember he was telling me a book based on the Florida Cow Cavalry.
Yeah, that one I think has been out for several years. And then there's the book on the Milton Light Artillery that I can't remember if I've read or not. But I mean, and I know Florida only had 11 infantry regiments, and I think 1 cavalry regiment, and then the Cow Cavalry. I could be wrong about that. And the Milton Light Artillery. So there's not a lot out there. North Carolina had over 70 infantry regiments, and Tennessee is up there as well. But there's a lot of work that can be done, and it just takes a lot of due diligence and patience trying to root out this information. Old newspapers, stuff in archives, stuff in family history books. I've a lot of times will go through family history books looking for letters because, in a genealogical newsletter or historical society newsletter, they'll put copies of letters and diaries in there or reminiscences. And so there's a lot of stuff that you can draw upon to try and create these accounts.
Now, when you were doing the research of your book, did you come across anything where beef or supplies were coming in from Cuba?
No, I don't remember Cuba. The Nassau, the Bahamas, 2 or 3 of those other islands, but I can't say it didn't happen, but I don't remember it popping up in my research. It was really Nassau and couple of the other places like that. And I don't know why Cuba doesn't come up more. That's a great question. But I never really recalled seeing anything Cuba related.
Yeah, there's a story down in my area. Is some of the cattlemen will take their cattle to Ponderosa, which is over by Sanibel.
Right.
Load them up on ships, and it would go from there to Cuba.
Right.
The stories I've been told. I don't know if they're true or
that's
not.
entirely I almost want to say I remember something like that. Was it the Federals who were taking the cattle to Cuba?
I know
Fort Myers after it was captured.
Well, Yeah, because there's stories of federal troops coming out of Fort Myers into the countryside, stealing cattle from the local cattlemen,
Right.
bringing them into Fort Myers, loading up on ships, and doing doing the journey up north.
Maybe so. Maybe so. I want to say now that we talk about it, I almost remember it. And once again, I encourage people to check out the Rebel Storehouse book. Just a fascinating account.
Cool. I gotta
Just
keep
about
that in
Florida.
mind.
Just about Florida. Victor, I actually went and looked, and this page says that there was a 1st Florida Cavalry, 2nd Florida Cavalry, 3rd Battalion, 5th Battalion. I don't know what happened to 4th Battalion, but I don't know. And then the Cal Cavalry and Fernandez's Mounted Company and Smith's Cavalry Company. And there are on this list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 artillery batteries that came out of Florida. Leon, Milton, Marion, Kilcrease, Dykes, and Ambles artillery companies.
You did say Gambles, right?
Says I don't see a Gambles.
Okay.
Amble. Abell.
Okay.
So I think there's a lot of work to be done. And if I can ever help anybody that's inspired to do something like that, I've written 3 regimentals, 1 brigade history, a bunch of other stuff. Please just drop me a line. And I will try and point you in the right direction and do whatever I can. There needs to be more of us doing this type of work. It's great what we do. It's great that we get out in cemeteries and put up tombstones and clean cemeteries and do programs in schools. And I've done all of that over the years. I was actually in a cemetery this morning. But writing something and putting something in print, and it's a challenge. 100 years from now, somebody may find that book. 150 years from now, somebody may find that book. And, I don't think I'm anything special. And I think, there are some people who can't write, but, those people just need good editors. So that's what I found. Victor also talks about maybe some of Longstreet's cigars came from Cuba. Maybe so. Maybe some of Grant's cigars came from Cuba too. I'm not sure where. I mean, if you're growing all of that tobacco in Virginia and North Carolina, I would say a lot of their tobacco and their cigars came from there, but I don't actually know. That's a great question.
Yep. Ready. Well, guys and girls, feel free to ask Michael questions, or you can ask me questions, either or. You're fired, Jerry.
Jerry's talking about the 26th North Carolina. They are still a great group. I have a lot of friends in that reenacting organization, and they do some incredible things. They have raised tens of thousands of dollars to preserve flags and uniforms and put up monuments and markers on battlefields. Legal fights, when we lost the Vance statue here in the state of North Carolina in Asheville, they took the city of Asheville to court, and just some great folks in the 26th North Carolina.
Gary, yes. Michael might have a Pacific book on Governor Milton.
There is. Let me go here and once again check that library catalog. There is both. There is a biography on Milton, and his letters have been published. The book is by, and the letters are both by M. Edward Hughes. They came out in 2015. The book is called Governor John Milton and the War for Southern Independence, a Confederate History of Florida in the Civil War. And it says it's volume 1. I don't recall ever seeing volume 2. So I'm not what ups with that. But his letters have also been published, wartime letters, and they are both big books. The wartime letter book is 740 pages. And the biography is 392 pages. So just tons of stuff on Milton. There, and I actually wrote a blog post about this. There are actually, Florida's doing okay overall when it comes to wartime histories. There, we've mentioned Rebel Storehouse, but in some of the classics like Dickinson and His Men, Civil War in Florida came out in 1899. Florida During the War came out in 1975. Confederate Florida: The Road to Olustee in 1990. Blockaders, Refugees, and Contraband in 93. But there's a lot of new stuff. Thunder on the River. There's a book on the Battle of Natural Bridge. Florida Brigade in the Army of Northern Virginia. Books about other blockade runners discovering the Civil War in Florida. Florida Brigade in the Army of Tennessee. Just there's a lot of stuff out there. And can I post a link in the comments?
You should be able to, Michael.
So
if you're not able to, Michael, just DM me and I can post it for you. But you should be able to.
Let's I put it on the Facebook page. So that's a post I did back in 2023, and there may be more stuff now. That's kind of a historiography of books about Florida and the war. Just a lot of great stuff out there, but there's always room for more. Always room for more. Wilford asked, is there any information on the 2nd North Carolina Infantry? There's not a standalone biography, but there's a series of books right there on my shelf called the history. What is it called? The History of North Carolina During the Great War, 1861 to 1865, Histories and Regiments. And what the editor was a Confederate veteran who was a justice on the North Carolina Supreme Court, and he contacted a member from every regiment from a Florida regiment, or from a North Carolina regiment, and asked them to write a history of their regiment, and they did. And there's images and everything in there. And it's 5 volumes. It was released in 1902 or 3 or 4 or someplace in there. Wouldn't it have been awesome if every state would have done that? There was an organization that was a part of the United Confederate Veterans. It's kind of like their historical society, and they recommended every county, every UDC chapter to collect these histories, and some of them did, and they're remarkable things. But it's I wish more places had done that, and more of these things would have survived, because there's a wealth of information out there. You just got to dig for it. It doesn't always come easy. Wilford, you can actually, if you go to archive.org and type in Clark's Histories of Several Regiments, you should be able to access that online. It's been digitized.
Wow.
So
that's cool.
You know, growing up, I participated in my first reenactment in Orange Springs, there on the edge of the Ocala National Forest, in November of 1982, and reenacting all of those years in Florida. And of course, we went a lot of other places as far north as Gettysburg. You know, reading all of this stuff, you kind of develop, you know, in being interested, you kind of figure out what's out there and what's not and what still needs to be done. I've only ever written one little book on Florida. It was a little history of the Bayport Brooksville raid. But there's still a lot of work that can be done. Even with that list of stuff that I sent a little while ago, still tons of stuff to be done. And not just on Florida, you know, there are many states and places that need things.
Yep. Yeah, because I didn't get into reenacting to the early 90s.
Yes.
And had fun with it all the way to present day.
It's a lot of fun. I don't go to a lot of reenactments anymore. You know, the bad knees and feet and all of that stuff. We have a couple of historic sites close by that we volunteer at on a regular basis. Sometimes a couple of times a month, we'll go over there for the day and just educate people. And sometimes I miss it a lot, but I'm blessed. You know, I get to do some incredible things and go to some incredible places. Garrett wants to know, did I have any ancestors in Florida regiments? I actually did. I have a great great uncle whose name was Huell Glanton, Glanton, and he joined the 37th Alabama with my great great grandfather in early 1862, late 1861. When the regiment was surrendered or at Vicksburg and paroled, my great great grandfather went back to the 37th Alabama when it was reconstituted, but my great great uncle Huell did not. He wound up in the 11th Florida and in the Army of Tennessee. So I did have an ancestor that served in a Florida regiment during the war. I do not understand why he did not go back to the 37th Alabama. Do not understand, and how he wound up in the 11th Florida. They lived in South Alabama at the time, Henry County, just up above Dothan. So I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever find an answer to that question, but maybe someday. The 11th Florida, I think, was made up of a couple of battalions. Maybe the 6th Florida Battalion was in there. I wouldn't quote me on that, but I haven't looked at that in a while. But fascinating stuff. Jerry asked about Battle of Fort Fisher, Confederate Goliath, that Ryan posted is a fabulous book, and I would highly recommend that.
Cool. Well, guys, I hate to say it, but the time has went by quick. A lot of good information.
Always goes quick when you're having fun.
Especially learning. That's why I always like your show, Michael, because it's more history and it's more about books.
Right.
Now, you were saying something Sunday night that you had moved your show to a different page.
It is. I've for years had a author's page on Facebook. I also have a YouTube channel called Hardy on History, and so I just renamed my author's page Hardy on History, and we are going to move Sunday Night History Chat over there, and I'm going to I've already started working on some short form video contact called Hardy on History Shorts, and you know, just going to explore just it's micro history, just some of the littlest things. When I get down there next, probably in October, I would like to do some of the shorts as I travel through the state of Florida. And who knows, maybe I'll be before then. I don't know. I have spoke to several SCV camps in Florida over the years. I've spoke to, I think, your camp in Fort Myers years ago, and the camp in Ocoee and a couple of other places. So maybe it's time to think about putting another Florida tour together. I just don't want to come in the summertime.
Especially in the camp I'm in now. I'm in the camp down in Naples, Florida.
Okay. That's a long way away.
Long way, and we're right on the edge of the Everglades.
Yeah, that's a long way. But yeah.
But when you get your ducks in order and you want to do the Florida tour, let me know, because there's several camp commanders here
Right.
throughout Central and North Florida that probably would love to have you.
Yep.
And you probably get invited to some of the ones in South Florida.
I often kid, we live in the mountains of Western North Carolina. It can get really cold and snowy up here. And I've often told my wife, in late January, early February, that we need a research trip to Key West. So,
actually,
I don't know what I would research, but
actually, there is UCV markers.
Yeah.
At some of the graves that I found in Key West.
Yeah.
It's
amazing how far and deep that history is.
Yeah.
It really is. Garrett says I should move back down there, but I talked to my dad yesterday, and I think he said it was 96 degrees, or Monday. Yep. I talked to him Monday, and I'm like, I'm good. It's like 73 outside. That was in the daytime, and I'm like, I'm good.
Speaking of your mom and dad, your dad, how's he doing these days?
He's okay. He's not young anymore, and has neuropathy in his feet, so he doesn't get around really well. But I talked to him on Monday, or maybe yesterday, and they're doing fine. Still living. They live there in Lake County, and yeah, still doing good.
Cool.
Something's changed. I don't know it. So
right. Yeah. I haven't seen him in years. But the last time I saw him, I knew he was busy, didn't get a chance to talk with him, was at the reenactment there in Dade City at the Pioneer Museum.
Yep. And he'll probably be back again. I think they do that in November. So
yes, sir.
They'll probably be back.
Yep. All right, guys and girls, it's that time of night. I just want to say thank you to Michael Hardy to taking time out of his busy schedule to join us tonight. I hope everybody that joined tonight learned something. I know I did. So you guys in the Mechanized Cavalry, I'll see y'all tomorrow night. If you're feeling down and out, you don't know which way to go, check out Psalms 23. Anytime I'm feeling depressed or want to slap somebody, I turn to that.
Yep.
So stay young, stay out of trouble. May God bless you in your adventures this week. Till next Wednesday, stay Southern.
My name is Nelson W. Winbush. I'm a member of the Jacob Sumner Camp 1516, Sons of Confederate Veterans. My reason for joining the Sons of Confederate Veterans, after the NAACP declared they would destroy and remove everything Confederate in 1990, I decided that I would do all I could to make sure that people understood what the Confederacy stood for.